Good day, good day, good day. Welcome to this official Property Entrepreneur podcast, and I'm out in the sunny fields of somewhere around the northwest at the minute, and it's just beautiful. We're so blessed to have this weather and absolutely make the most of it. Depending when you listen to this podcast, we're rapidly approaching summer solstice on Monday, which is the longest day of the year, and after that we start changing gears and turning back towards autumn. So we've got 3 months of the championship season, 3 months of opening the taps, 3 months of sales, marketing, deals and expansion. Make the most of it. I'm going to change gears a little bit in this podcast and talk about first aid. So not the normal business, investment, personal development topic, but probably single-handedly the highest value investment you can make in yourself over the next 7 days, and even in the next an action to take in the next 24 hours. This will not only give you confidence to put yourself in any position, but will put you in a position that should, and at some point in your life this will happen, should you find yourself in a vulnerable, dangerous, high risk position where somebody around you, whether it's a stranger or probably more likely friend, family, your husband, wife, child, parents, require assistance, and you haven't been able to get they require assistance. You want to know that you can go in there and give them what they need, and also when it comes to crunch time and you're there, you actually have the ability to do it. At the weekend there was a incident at the Euros. So I don't profess to know anything about football, so I'm not going to try and rattle off names and teams. But at one of the Euro games, there was a player that suffered some kind of seizure, heart attack. I don't know what the details were, but he collapsed. And this is the thing about first aid: you don't know what's happened, and if you don't know how to address it, you could be doing something that's completely detrimental rather than effective. The player collapsed on the pitch, and it very quickly became apparent in front of millions of people that there was a medical emergency. And many of you have seen it. You would have seen it on YouTube, you would have seen it live, you would have read various things about it. The most important thing to pull out of it is the team captain was there in an instant. He was there standing next to him before the medics got there, and was able to put him into a recovery position and clear his airways, because he knew basic first aid. And he's now already been crowned the champion or the hero of Euros 2020 or 2021 based on the actions he took there. He literally saved one of his teammates' lives. Now, this is not to be, the significance of that is not to be understated. And I want to share with you a story that I hope, if nothing else, makes you take action, literally today. And in the next 7 days, or in the next 30 days, as soon as you can get it done, you get first aid trained. So I was at an airport about 5 years ago, and a gentleman, I was queuing to board the plane. I was on my own, and a gentleman collapsed and started having a seizure. And I'd never seen anything like that before. I was completely not expecting it, as you never would be. And I went into this state of panic and shock. And I just froze. I just stood there and froze and watched this grown man have a seizure on the floor. Now, thankfully, in the queue of people, there was a doctor. And within 20 or 30 seconds, which to me seemed like a lifetime, this doctor was able to go over there and provide the required first aid to care for the gentleman. After that was done, I sat there and I felt guilty. I felt embarrassed. I felt completely helpless. And I thought, this case was fortunate on two bases. The first was that there was a doctor there, and the second was that this wasn't my friend, my family, somebody close to me. Next time this happens, there might not be a doctor there, and next time this happens, you wouldn't want it to happen to anyone, but imagine if it happened to your son or your daughter or your partner or your husband or your wife or your mother or your father, one of your work colleagues, anybody that you have a relationship with, and it's your responsibility. You're the only person that's there to offer assistance, and you're not able to do it. You will feel how I felt on that day, standing at the airport, feeling completely helpless and useless, and actually pretty emotional that I had no idea what to do. And that's one of the first times I've experienced that in my life. Before I got on the plane, I messaged Lucy, my assistant, and said, can you book me on the first aid course you can find? I don't care where it is, I don't care when it is, just get me on a first aid course as soon as possible. And to me, counting down the days to that course was like high anxiety. I was thinking, if this happens to me again, I'm really not ready. So I put myself on the course. I completed the first aid. It was about half a day. And it's first aid. It's the simple things. It's like how to understand what a seizure is, how to understand what a heart attack is, how to understand the recovery position, how to approach when you approach a first aid situation, how to actually appraise it. Because even that, if you don't know what you're doing, people will do what they think, or worse, could do something that's actually detrimental. And after that half day training, I was then geared up with basic first aid, and they also give you an app, so I downloaded it, and I actually quite frequently flick through it just to remind myself of the difference between heart attacks and seizures, the difference between burns and what was the example I gave yesterday when I was talking to somebody? Burns and bleeds. So if it's a burn, you treat it very, very differently to how you treat your bleed. And don't take any first aid advice from me in this video. I'm going to be very careful not to offer any as I describe a few things. But I did my first aid training, I got my certificate, and that was it. And then I left with the confidence and the ability and the resources in the app that they give you to deliver first aid. And then about 3 years went on, and I didn't use it once. I'd never used it. Fortunate enough to never be in a situation where somebody's required it. But then in the space of 6 months last year, I believe it was, in the space of 6 months, I had to use first aid 3 times. And had I have not been able to use that first aid, in every situation there was nobody else qualified. So there was other people in all of these 3 incidences, but I was the only one who was first aid qualified. And I was able then to administer or deliver first aid assistance. And it's the basics. Some of it's the basics, some of it's the fundamentals. But the first one was I was around a friend's house in the studio making some music, and we heard this explosion outside. And we thought, what on earth is that? It sounds like a house has exploded. Ran outside, a car had lost control, come flying around the corner, lost control, gone straight through a garden wall, and then loads of young children came running out of it. I don't know the story behind it. I don't know what caused it, but the outcome was a young guy, all these guys fled, and a young guy got out of the car carrying something. I don't know exactly what it was, and I won't say just because I don't know. And then he was clearly stumbling, clearly disorientated, and then he collapsed on the road. Now, a lady from a house ran out, I grabbed my boots and ran out, and my friend ran out. And we were the first ones in attendance, and the first ones with any first aid experience. And from that, we were able to do what you need to do in that situation, and basically provide first aid care until the professional services arrived. In this case, the chap had actually been stabbed, and had he not have received the 10, 15, 20 minutes first aid, we were actually helping, when the ambulance arrived, we were actually helping deliver the first aid and the care above the police officers. You know, we were there, we were the first on the scene, we were supporting this young chap, and yeah, it turned out he'd been stabbed, and the paramedics arrived. We then had to wait for an air ambulance to arrive, and initially we gave him first aid. Then the paramedics arrived, and we were able to support the paramedics because we understood what to do. And then eventually the air ambulance arrived, carried him off, and he went off to get some pretty life-saving treatment for his wounds. That night the detectives came round because they were going around knocking door to door, interviewing, obviously looking for the legal side of things, wanted to understand what happened, speak to those who were there. And they said that when they arrived at ours, they started off, they weren't hugely interested in the storytelling initially. They were more interested in acknowledging us, and said, congratulations for the first aid and the support that you offered. You've quite possibly saved that young guy's life. Now, when you're in that position, to know that you've saved somebody's life, it's a phenomenal feeling. Like, it's great, and you're just so grateful that you knew what to do. In the worst case scenario, that we weren't able to deliver that first aid, and had he have, in the worst case, ended up with permanent injuries or actually died, that would have been a very sad story, and that would inadvertently have my guilt and my responsibility written all over it. So that is the first case where it came into great use. The second, I was cruising the narrowboat through the canals, and we pulled up at a pub for some lunch, and as what you start to see a trend in how these happen. You get the commotion, which is one of the first things that you deal with in first aid, is you get the commotion, so something's happened. And then the second time was in this pub garden, and this elderly lady, like I would say probably well into mid-70s, maybe even early 80s, collapsed. So she collapsed in the pub garden. Her partner was actually trying to lift her up while she was sort of semi-unconscious by her arms, and the bar staff were running around. All the people in the clients in the pub were sort of all in shock, and I didn't actually see her collapse. I heard the commotion, and then somebody, one of my friends or family, said, "Lady's collapsed." We said, "Oh, my son knows first aid." So I went over there and gave this lady initial care and first aid, and just, it's a really difficult position to be in. It's like, it's a position of a high responsibility, and you've really got to think very logically. But the good thing, when you don't know what you're doing, it's horrendous. You go into shock, you feel absolutely helpless, and you just stand there. But when you know what to do, you just switch into autopilot. And then for 30-45 minutes, I gave her first aid. I brought her back round. The people in the pub, they had no first aider on site. I said, "Right, can you just go and get your I don't know what you call it, on duty first aider?" And they were like, "We don't actually have one." And I was like, "Great." So it's me and about 100 people, and I'm the only person who knows how to deliver first aid. And anyway, I gave her care for 30 to 45 minutes, made sure she was all right, did all the things that you needed to do. And then that was another scenario where not only were her and her husband or her partner really, really grateful, but I was able to give her first aid. And in that scenario, it was more how to deal with the situation and how to reassure the person, because most people go, again, I don't want to give first aid advice, but in that scenario, it's a lot about how to handle the situation, how to care for the patient. There's so many bits that I'd like to share with you. I'm not going to for fear of offering first aid advice. But basically, I was in the position again, 100 people or so in the pub garden. The pub didn't have any first aiders. I was the only first aider, and I was able to offer care to an elderly lady, and she went away an hour or so later, fit well and back in a good position. Once the incident's over though, and the adrenaline drops, honestly, it's like I find it very, very emotional. I find it quite emotional just talking about it. But you're able to support in that instance, where that's 2 instances out of 2 when nobody else was first aid trained. And then the third was I was on the canal boat. So I was on the canal, and my mum also lives on a canal. She was more on a canal boat. She was moored a few boats up, and I literally just got up, just sort of having a cup of tea, and she ran over and said, "There's a lady that's fallen over and smashed her head open on the where you tie your boats up on the canal. They're on real heavy duty, I don't know what you call them. They're like hooks basically. And this lady had, again, elderly lady, probably late 70s, had lost grip of the rope as she was pulling it, fallen back, and really unfortunately her head had impacted straight onto the hook, and it had split her head open. And I got there, and there was blood everywhere. She had tissues, but she was conscious. And again, I was able to deal with the situation. I was able to deliver first aid. I was able to brief the paramedics on their way in as to what they were likely to expect, and then just provide the required first aid, and in some the required first aid to ensure that lady is okay. And then I actually saw her later on that afternoon in the pub, ironically, and she bought me a pint and just thanked me for my care and being able to, if nothing else, reassure her whilst in the immediate and then whilst the emergency services arrived. This skill that you can get in half a day's training for, I don't know how much it is, a couple of £100, 150 quid maybe. You'll probably be able to get your employer or somebody to give you a discount or do it for free. This skill is one that should be compulsory. There's 3 instances there, some of which where I was able to deliver life-saving care to somebody that had been stabbed, and the detectives came and we waited with him and treated him until the air ambulance arrived. And in other cases, just being able to deal with a situation, know what to do, and provide somebody who's in quite a position of distress some comfort and reassurance and whatever they need in that scenario, and be both knowledgeable and understanding, but also confident in what you're doing. That first instance when I had it, and if you're not first trained and you're listening to this, what would you do? Imagine yourself in any of those 4 scenarios. The first one when I was at the airport, the 3 cases where I actually delivered first aid. What would you do in that scenario? How would you feel? If you're not first aid qualified then, or trained, then you're in a very exposed position, and you do not want to be in the position I was in, where you're completely helpless, you're completely embarrassed, and you're completely, it's just really, really not a good feeling. I can teach you 1,000,001 things. I can teach you how to start a business. I can teach you how to make money. I can teach you how to be a leader, a manager, an entrepreneur. The highest value skill that I can offer you, or the highest value thing I can offer you, is the direction, and take it as an instruction even. So once you finish listening to this podcast, go online, Google first aid in your city, first aid training in your city, and then book the first training you can get on. You're in a very exposed position at the minute, and if it hasn't happened to you, you're very fortunate, but that clock is ticking. At some point in the next week, month, year, you're going to be in the position I was in, one of those 4 positions, and you're either going to be ready for it or you're not. And I would say whatever's in your diary, cancel it, reschedule it, get yourself booked into the first aid training you can. So in the same way as that football player on the pitch that saved his teammate's life, you can be ready to deliver somebody the care that they need when they need it. And the other thing is, again, I think first aid training should be compulsory. I don't think it should be optional. I think every single person who's mentally and physically able should have to be first aid trained. The impact of getting more people first aid trained as well is if you do it. And I would encourage you to get your friends to do it, and book your family on it, and the people in your business. Tell everybody to go and get first aid trained, because at some point in your life, you're going to have an injury, you're going to collapse, you're going to have a seizure, you're going to overheat, you're going to burn yourself, you're going to cause a puncture wound or something that's going to cause you to bleed, and you're going to need first aid, because nobody knows how far away that ambulance is, or that air ambulance, and that first aid is the life-saving treatment everybody needs. Ladies and gents, the only thing I would ask of you or instruct you to do is stop listening to this podcast, go online, book yourself a first aid course, and make sure that when you're in that terrible position, that horrible position that I found myself in, you know exactly what to do, and you don't have to carry that weight around with you, that you were not prepared for the situation. Having done that and having been first aid trained, it's a privilege to be able to offer care to somebody. I'm very proud of the instances where I've been able to support, and I would, in a heartbeat or a second, flip the switch into logic mode and jump into a situation whenever it happened, because I've got the confidence and the knowledge to do so. I want every single one of you listening to this podcast to go and do the same. Get yourself first aid trained, and at some point in your life, you're going to be able to offer assistance and save the life potentially of somebody else. So I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Press stop on this podcast. Make sure you subscribe first. press stop on this podcast, book yourself on, and yeah, just do what you gotta do. We're human beings, we're all part of the same journey, and we need to make sure we're ready for everything. So I wish you the best. Go do it now. Much love to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.